Father, Lord God, thank you for this time that we have to just come into your holy presence, Lord God. Oh, Lord God, we submit ourselves to you, Lord God. We thank you for the sacrifice that you made for us, Lord God, so that we can live in freedom, Lord God. Lord, may your name be glorified today, Lord God. May my words not be spoken, but only you alone. In your precious name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I want to actually start off by reading a poem. I don't have the slides ready yet. It's ready? Great. Okay, so as many of you know, I teach 10th grade English, and as part of our yearly activities, we have the students work and read a poem and try to figure out the meaning of it. So I'm going to do the same activity with all of you here today. So you're going to listen to this and tell me what do you think the meaning of this poem is. And there's a graphic that's going to be shown that will somewhat reveal it. So I'm asking for the slides people to hold off on the graphic until we read through the full poem. Two roads diverged in yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps a better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as far for that passing there had worn them really about the same. And both had mourning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I ever should come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. So you'll see this phrase, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. You'll see that on like graduation caps very often. What do you think? What does that mean? Any guesses? Yeah, what do you think?
They're like two paths, one good, one bad, and you took the right one.
Okay, so that's the common interpretation of this. Now let's look at what the slideshow shows us. So the topic for today is the road not taken, and let's keep going. So again, you see two roads diverge in yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. Keep going. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could. One is going to Brazil and living this exotic, different life, and one of them is going to So you see two different versions of his life, and you may be noticing some things about what's happening in these two images. Keep going. In a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. So you see these images; they look very similar, right? Yeah. Keep going. And that has made all the difference. This is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. So what's kind of funny is it's essentially showing that we glamorize sometimes this other road that we can take in our lives, this other thing you could have done and how different things would have been, but does it really make that much of a difference? And looking at that man over there, I don't think so. But what's funny is teaching high schoolers, can you go back to the slide right before? They'll look at that last photo and they'll say, well, that man had more photos, like picture frames in that one, so I feel like he had a better life. But that's not the point. Basically, what we teach our students is that Robert Frost, when he wrote this poem, he actually had a friend, or like people would say that he had this friend who would always say, like, I should have gone this different route, I should have done this different thing, and because I didn't do that, my life is the way it is. And he created this poem to really argue, no, actually, your life would have been the same. Like, you imagine your life would be so different, but it actually looks kind of the same. And when I was asked by Samuel to speak on this message, I felt like God was really pointing out this poem to me, because a lot of times in our lives we can become distracted by certain things, or imagining that the grass is green on the other side, or imagining all these different other situations or possibilities in our life. But really, has it made all the difference? And when you look at that man, what I noticed more than anything is it was his attitude that really mattered. He was smiling in both situations. He was happy in both situations. So that's really what I want to be focusing on today. We think that these big choices in our lives are going to make a huge difference, but really it's these small decisions that we make to continually choose God every day in the small moments that make a bigger difference. So this past week, I think many of us have heard about the loss of some incredible people who are very well known in our culture. And Dustin, if you keep going, you'll see their pictures. This is Kate Spade, and she committed suicide. And again, the next slide. Anthony Bourdain, who I think a lot of people know. He even went to Kerala, he ate some of the food, and even my mom was like very upset about this because I was talking to my co-teacher, who's actually a Malayali woman, and she was saying, you know, how are all these rich people like not able to handle their lives? Like us regular people, like we don't have all this money, we don't have all whatever, like we live our lives, why can't they? But really I think it comes down to the fact that people become distracted by the wrong things in their life, and that's what I want to focus on. And if you look at Romans 15:13, go to the next slide, this is really what I want us to focus on today. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So this message, when we look at our society, when we look at what is happening, the choice that people are making, today I think God is reminding us that there is a message of hope, but that hope is only found when we look at God. So I want to first also cite some of the different sources that a lot of these ideas are coming from. So first is The Battlefield of the Mind, and this is by Joyce Meyer. Do any of you guys know Joyce Meyer? Yeah, she's an amazing preacher. So what's funny is I was reading this book in the midst of hearing about all these different suicides that happened this week. So this really stood out to me. I also want to give a shout out to T.D. Jakes because there's an idea that I'll be sharing from him. And lastly, our very own, next slide. Okay, it's not there? Okay, I had Samangal there. But basically our very own Samangal, I also want to give a shout out to him. Every day we are facing different decisions, and that's really what this message is about. So for me, actually, I found that I was in a period, I don't know if I've ever shared this with any of you, but today I guess I am. I really battled between deciding whether or not I wanted to be in ministry or if I wanted to continue being a teacher. And what's funny is it'll come in waves. Like I'll decide later on that I'm going to forget about it, or other times I focus on it more and more. But I feel like God showed me this particular passage in this time because instead of doing my job as the way I was supposed to be doing it, I was so stuck glamorizing and looking at like a different life or what things could be. But today we're going to be focusing on the battle that's right in front of us. So every day we face a battlefield in our minds, and that's dealing with distractions, discontentment, and fear. And Ephesians 6 verse 12 tells us this: "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So every day in our lives, the devil tries to speak to us. He tries to whisper things and tell us that we cannot do things, that we're not good enough, that we are not capable enough. But we see that in 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5, it says, "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ." So that is going to be our challenge for today. In the midst of a battlefield, in the midst of things that seem beyond our control, how can we take captive our thoughts and focus on the right things? So part of the problem is we become distracted by so many different things in our lives. So actually today I was going to get a haircut. As you can see, my hair is now cut, so I succeeded. But on the way here, I was driving and I saw a garage sale. And recently I've been more into like thrifted items, things that are used. And I was looking at that and I almost hit into the car in front of me. And sometimes in our walks with God, sometimes in the things that we're doing, we just think we're glancing away for a second, but we're getting distracted by something that we should not be distracted by. And we can look back at the parable of the sower to really point at this. So, parable of the sower, what is that about? What do we remember about the parable of the sower? You guys can be my active participants for today. So, like, what do we know? What does a sower do?
Plant seeds.
Plant seeds, yes. So have any of you ever tried to grow plants before? It's really hard. Yeah, you guys are like, yes. Abigail's nodding her head a lot. You know it's hard. I'm tried to grow a basil plant. It didn't work out. So I think a lot of us know what it's like to try to grow things. But one thing that can really stop something from growing is thorns. So we look at Matthew 13:22, and it says, "The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but worries of their life and the deceitfulness of wealth chokes the word, making it unfruitful." So I've heard about this plant, this seed that's fallen many times, and I've always thought, you know, that's not me. Like, that couldn't possibly be me. Like, I'm not that type of person. But T.D. Jakes, I randomly listened to sermons online, and T.D. Jakes was sharing on this. And he was basically talking about how we allow certain worries, that things that we don't even know are going to happen, and we allow those things to distract us. And something for us to consider is the fact that we plant certain thorns in our life. We plant certain things that become hindrances in our lives. And by our thoughts that we continually feed over and over again, we are allowing that plant to grow its roots further and further in our lives. So I actually have a story about a student. So for the people who are younger here, if I told you that you don't have to have homework ever again, would you be? Right? Even the adults here, do you want homework? No, okay, I was a little scared for a second. I thought someone would say yes. So most of us acknowledge, like, we would not want homework, we would not want extra work. So this particular student, he really struggles with basically his workload. So he was in this continuous cycle where basically he was doing so much homework at night that he wasn't getting enough sleep. So he was coming into class tired and sleeping during class and not doing his classwork, so he had more homework. And then because he had homework, he was not sleeping. So there was a continuous cycle that he was facing in his life. And so all of his teachers met, and we realized, you know, we can't let this student, he's still very smart. He can still do all the work for a high school student. So we said, we can't let the student become overburdened just because he can't do the homework. We can change the assignments, and he can still pass 10th grade and take the Regents. So go to the student, I tell the student, you know what? You don't have homework anymore. And you would think that this would be the best news ever, and I think God sometimes does this for us. You have like something you're dealing with in your life, and God tells you, you know what, no, you have victory over this, right? And at first, he was really happy. He was like, okay, yeah, I'll make sure I go to sleep if you make sure I don't have homework. Great, that's awesome. Then the next day comes. We had the best lesson that day that I ever had with the student in my class. The next day comes, and I see the student not paying attention to anything I'm saying, totally distracted. And so I go to the student he's working on, because he literally has no homework. So like, what do you think he could possibly be working on? He's very academic, so he still wants to do well. Any guesses? No guesses? What do you think?
Homework from a different class.
Okay, so no homework in any of his classes. So actually, what he was working on, and granted I think we decided to implement this like around May, he was working on an essay that I assigned him in October. Literally working on an essay from October. The grade book for that is long over. There's literally no chance that I could even add that or give him any credit for his grade, but he was looking at something in his past that was closed, shut, and over. And I spoke to him and said, why are you doing this? Like, the lesson we're doing, we have a Regents coming, like the lesson we're doing right now is obviously more important. And I think God sometimes sees us, and he sees us worrying about something that's so small and insignificant, and the lesson, whatever we're going through, is so far from important anymore, but we're still looking at that thing and thinking it's so important, because in his world, that assignment was important, and in our world, we think that thing that we had bonded over is so important. And I spoke to another one of the teachers at my school about this, and she was telling me that this is actually, okay, that's not really, okay. She was telling me that this is actually a common behavioral problem. When you remove like a certain behavior in a student or even a person, we become so used to living our life a certain way that we go back to that behavior. So even when we have victory, when we have completely overcome something in our lives, the devil tries to whisper to us and tell us and feed those fears that we once had in our lives. But we have to remember that regardless of our human behavior and our human nature, that we already have overcome that. And that's why we have to be so careful with the thoughts that we are allowing into our lives. And actually, go back to the distraction one. Even in our cars, distraction, being distracted by certain thoughts or certain ideas that the devil tries to deter us with, is one of the reasons why distracted driving has resulted in 2016 for 3,450 people being killed, 391,000 people being injured, and injured in motor vehicles involved with distracted drivers in 2015. We worry and we think about these different problems instead of focusing on what's right in front of us and the will that God has for us in our lives. So if we are able to remember our real purpose, we are able to be like Paul and find joy in all circumstances in life. So the beginning poem that we saw, we saw a man who could have gone two different ways in his life, but the road was essentially the same. And a lot of times we imagine that if our circumstances change, if something is really different, that our lives would be significantly better. But a lot of times it really comes down to our perspective of what is happening. So I have a story about a woman I met at Duane Reade. So you all remember when we had flu season, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty bad, and my mom was very upset because I'm a teacher and I didn't get my flu shot. So I finally decided, okay, it's time for me to go and get a flu shot. And I don't know how I end up always near like the weirdest people, but I went to the Duane Reade, see this woman who's in front of me, and she's yelling at the pharmacist. Like, I have no idea why she's yelling at this woman, but she's yelling at her and telling her, actually I do know why. She was angry that she wouldn't give her a prescription that she wanted. So because she was angry about the prescription, and literally the pharmacist has no control over whether or not the prescription will be given anyway, but this woman is intent on yelling at this person. So I just ignore this woman because I'm trying to think positively and trying not to let negative people make me upset. And this woman like goes to the side and I ask for the flu shot. So I'm told to stand to the side and wait and then I'll be called. And for some reason, this woman decides to sit next to me. And she sits next to me and starts to tell me all of her complaints about life. She tells me how like she used to be able to afford to live in Manhattan and now rent is too high and she has to live here in Queens, like because Queens is so awful apparently, and she is so upset. And I couldn't help but notice like her entire situation, everything she was saying, how much of what was happening to her was because of how she was perceiving her environment. Like how much of it was because something was actually bad versus the fact that she saw everything to be bad in her life. And instead, we have a big challenge from Paul when we look at Philippians 4. So for some context, when we're looking at Philippians, this is Paul's letter to Philippians, and he is thanking them for their generosity. And in Philippians 4:12, he says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So I'm a very positive person, or I try to be a very positive person. Abigail was even pointing this out to me when I was coming here at church. But when I'm looking at this passage, when I'm looking at Paul, he represents an entirely different level of contentment that is found only in God. He says that whether he is well-fed or whether he is hungry, he still can go do everything only because of God who gives him strength. So when we look at someone like, we saw the example of Anthony Bourdain, this man who had all this money, all this wealth, Kate Spade, who had a daughter who she left behind. There are some things that this world can never provide us, but when we look at Paul, his focus wasn't on, can I get a better house? Can I have more money? Can I have better friends? Can I have more fun? he was so focused on God that regardless of what happened to him, regardless of the situation in front of him, he saw something so much greater. And what's funny for me is like, I realize like us as Christians, we have this incredible message, but for some reason we don't share this. We don't feel the need to tell other people about this. And I personally felt convicted about this because I think there's so many people we meet in our lives, so many people we encounter who can find joy in God alone, but for some reason we are not sharing this joy. And when we see things like what we heard in the media and what we see every day, I think we need to be reminded of the fact that there is such a joy found in God, such a joy found in not looking at this temporary circumstances, because even the very best of what this world can offer you is still nothing compared to God. And I think that's what Paul was able to see. And that's something that we can't see. And when I look at my students sometimes and how they're so worried about these tiny things, and I want to tell them like, it's fine, you know, like honestly, like that's not what's important. And I can see that in them. And I think sometimes God looks down at us and he sees things that are so not important, things from like ages ago that we're worried about, but we allow ourselves to be distracted instead of focusing on him and the joy that he ultimately offers that this world can never give us. So this message is for me, and this message is for all of you, to not let the enemy steal your joy. Do not let your thoughts run idle, because there are moments in my life where I've struggled with mental health, and I know in those moments that I'm allowing myself to think things that I should not be thinking. We are a child of God, set apart, set free, and no weapon formed against us shall prevail. We need to practice gratitude for the things in our lives. We look at the Israelites and how they missed out on the promised land because of a lack of gratitude. You can change your job, you can change your family, you can change your situation, but that doesn't guarantee anything if your focus is not correct. May God bless you with these words.
Jesus.